Hello everyone. In previous episodes, we have seen how Spain sought to follow up their military conquest with a spiritual victory. That is to say, evangelicizing the natives or Christianizing the natives and replacing their pagan deities with Christianity, and therefore also labeling their gods as demons and devils, to perform a cultural exorcism. Now, another people that the Spanish exorcised were the Maya.
Our story begins with the Franciscan missionary Diego de Landa. He was born in 1524 in Cifuentes, Spain, about 3 years after Cortés and his coalition took the Aztec capital. Landa was born into the world of the rising Spanish Empire, an empire whose goal of worldwide Christianization is something Landa himself would come to support. In Spain, Landa acquainted himself with the Franciscan religious order of Catholic mendicants, including its worldview and its mission. At its core, the Franciscan missionary enterprise held the conviction that the conversion of the natives represented a key moment in human history. And as we have seen in previous episodes, the Christianization of the Native Americans was a key step in the end times. And the successful spread of Catholicism would push humanity ever closer to the apocalypse. That is, the second coming of Christ, heaven on earth, a real paradise. This was a worldview embodied in Christopher Columbus. Keep in mind that Columbus had close ties to the Franciscans. And this intimate connection to the Franciscans is likely why Columbus saw his voyages as part of a holy mission, as part of a broader series of historic moments in history that would eventually lead to the recapture of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of its temples, and the universal conversion of all the world's peoples to Catholic Christianity. In this regard, the Franciscans played a very important role in turning Spain's imperial endeavor into a holy war. But the contributions of the Franciscans was not entirely limited to the realm of ideas. Now, Franciscans had long been associated with the more coercive aspects of Spanish society, sometimes as victims and at other times perpetrators. The reason why Franciscans felt themselves compelled to inflict violence upon others was because they first exacted violence against themselves. Indeed, during the medieval ages, violence against the self was part of the ideological package of the Franciscans. It was a mechanism for achieving their vows of poverty and obedience. Take the Franciscan Martín de Valencia, for example. Valencia was born in Oviedo, Spain in 1474. And one Franciscan said about him the following, quote, "He began to mortify the flesh and bring it into subjugation with fastings and scourgings." Martín de Valencia did this based on the idea that in order to truly demonstrate your love for Jesus, you first needed to conquer yourself. And conquering yourself meant inflicting violence against your very own body. Thus, for the Franciscans, the first stage in the process of violence and subjugation was directed against your very own self. And only after this first boundary was reached could you legitimately inflict violence upon other people, they believed. In fact, some historians argued that the Franciscans helped build the machinery of what would eventually become the Inquisition. For the Franciscans, the Inquisition provided a mechanism for extending its ritualized violence against other peoples. For example, in 1361, Angelo de Assisi produced a manual for inquisitors, which gives us insights into how traitors to the faith should be treated. Should a heretic be found in a particular house, that dwelling was to be burned to purify material reality from supposed dark forces. For the Franciscans, violence was a form of punishment which forced you and others to live up to Catholic Christian ideals. Now, technically, the Inquisition in America was not officially established until 1571, but the networks, the practices, and bishop inquisitors was already in place from the years of 1517. Franciscans were the key group for transmitting the Inquisition to the New World before its formal and official establishment. The Franciscan Martín de Valencia was the first friar to be given inquisitorial powers in America. he inaugurated a period known as the Early Monastic Inquisition. Valencia acted as an inquisitorial commissioner between the years of 1524 and 1526. And during his time, he transplanted a European culture of Catholic violence to America to be used against the indigenous Americans. And we kind of saw a little bit of this in previous episodes. For example, the Franciscan Fray Juan de Zumárraga, the first bishop of Mexico, initiated the Indian Inquisition between 1536 and 1543 involving Martín Ocelot. And this was the context whenever Diego de Landa arrived in the Yucatan in the late 1540s. He represented the goals of the Franciscan Order of Catholic Friars. His goal was that of the Spanish Empire, to ensure the spiritual conversion of the Maya into good Christian peoples. Much of what we know about Landa's Inquisition comes from his own writings, what is known as the Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, or the account of the things of the Yucatan. Landa's The Account intertwines Spanish and Maya history in a way which is driven by his apocalyptic vision. He described the Spanish conquest of America in such a way as to portray it as a series of historical events leading to a holy climax. A major figure in his providential narrative was Hernán Cortés. After all, it was Cortés who persuaded King Charles V to make a major commitment to spread the gospel and evangelization. The spreading of the faith was key to the Franciscan mission. Another Franciscan went so far as to even compare Cortés to Moses. And Landa shared this vision. Landa said, quote, "Rightly then, may Spain glory in God, for he chose her from among all other nations to save so many people," unquote. Moreover, Diego's The Account is a work compiled by written sources, oral testimonies, interviews with informants, and predetermined sets of questionnaires. In order to properly police the American peoples, the Franciscans relied on the indigenous themselves to be their ears and eyes. And this was a continuation of European practices. In European Spain, local communities had been encouraged to denounce heretical family members to the Inquisition, and Diego de Landa brought this practice over to America. Native Americans were encouraged to become spies and informants for the Franciscans. Landa gleefully reported over the children who were indoctrinated in Catholicism. Landa noted that it was these very children who became the informants who told on their relatives who continued their pre-European religious practices. They notified the priest of supposed acts of idolatry, drunkenness, and other heretical errors. And the continuation of Maya idolatry for Landa was important for several reasons. Landa believed Spain's chance to push humanity toward the end times was falling out of reach. Landa wrote over the loss of Asia to Islam. He also talked about the loss of souls in Europe. By this time, the time of Landa's writings, the Protestant Reformation had taken hold and wrestled souls away from Catholicism. From the perspective of Landa and other die-hard Catholics, these were souls lost to heresy. Not only was the holy imperium of man besieged by all sides, it was also assailed from enemies within. And Landa believed that the church could not fail. He believed that there was a glimmer of hope. He said, quote, "Unless the Lord had left us a seed, we should have been like Saddam," unquote. Landa believed that Spain in its darkest hour could still triumph over the forces of heresy and darkness. And therefore, to ensure the victory of Catholicism, the Spanish Empire had to fight tooth and nail to win back souls piece by piece, bit by bit. And this is why the fight against idolatry in the Yucatan was so important, was so pivotal. Landa would do everything in his power to ensure that Spain triumphed over its heretical foes. For Landa and the Franciscans, the conversion of native souls was the pivotal moment for Spain to regain its footing. He argued that the piety of the Maya was a small but critical component for all of Christendom. This far-flung imperial outpost was not some mere backwater, but a key element of the spiritual core of the church. Landa issued a call to arms to combat the heretic, the witch, and the demon. He noted that the Maya have an inclination toward heresy. But they were not a lost cause. With the full backing and might of Spain, he could ensure their salvation, and therefore ensure the redemption of Catholicism as a whole. It should come as no surprise that Diego de Landa ended up instituting a brutal campaign of persecution against the Maya. After the dust settled, about 500 Maya men and women were tortured, about 200 were executed, and hundreds more were permanently injured. This violence was a result of Landa's attempts to extract confessions from his victims, confessions of supposed acts of idolatry. Landa employed a range of typical inquisitorial torture methods to extract these supposed confessions. He hung them up by their wrists and beat them. Other times, he and others bound his victims to wooden frames and continued to assault them there. He also did severe damage to Maya culture. He often used the words, quote, cruel and, quote, dirty to describe the Maya culture. Landa also oversaw the burning of Maya codices, images, and idols, often to a crowd of Maya spectators who were forced to watch their heritage being incinerated. Centuries of culture and poetry destroyed. Future generations denied stories about badass Maya gods. Denied unique cosmological and philosophical perspectives. Robbed of the full knowledge about the human condition. Landa himself later wrote, quote, finding in these books nothing more than the deceit of the devil, we had them burned, unquote. Landa frequently used the word devil synonymously with the word demon. These words are peppered throughout his reports on the Maya, and with these simple words, he erased a rich pantheon of deities, flattening a rich tapestry of mythology into one simple monolithic thing, the devil, or rather, the devil's countless manifestations. After all, Landa wrote glowingly over the Spanish conquest, saying that the conquistadors had come just in time, or else the Maya would still be worshipping their various manifestations of Satan. Let's take, for example, the Maya conception of time. According to modern scholars, the Maya believed in a cyclical conception of time. Time, like life, ended, but it also regenerated. Crops sprout, ripen, and decay. Empires and nations rise, and they also fall. The past and the present, the Maya believed, were part of a discernible pattern that could be read, and hence the Maya believed the future could be predicted. One scholar used the word cosmolectics to describe the cyclical ebb and flow of time. Cosmolectics is a word that ties this back and forth movement with the arrangement of the stars, the cosmos, history, sacred writings, and poetry. One god central to cosmolectics was K'awiil. After all, K'awiil played a main role in the retrograde movement of planets. K'awiil was known as the Maya Lord of the Smoking Mirror, the Maya counterpart to the Mexica Tezcatlipoca. This is because K'awiil was frequently depicted with obsidian, obsidian's mirror-like surface, and obsidian's smoky color. One scholar recognized the idea of a double gaze or dual vision as a core feature of K'awiil. That is, two visions at the same time, to see in the darkness and in lightness, to see close and far, unquote. K'awiil was frequently portrayed as a winged celestial deity. But moreover, K'awiil was a symbol the Maya used to understand the complexities which underlie reality. K'awiil represented the intertwined nature of these various perspectives, of looking forward and backwards, to look for good and to look for evil, to see in the day as well as the night. But it would be a mistake to characterize K'awiil's double gaze as dualistic, for K'awiil stressed the need to go beyond dualisms. As Nobel Peace Prize laureate Rigoberta Menchú emphasized, K'awiil meant, quote, don't just look at your path, for you must also see your steps and direction transparently, not just the physical path, but also the path of destiny, unquote. And Diego de Landa erased this nuanced cosmological vision by labeling K'awiil as the devil, or more accurately, as another demon, whose effigy gazed upon the Maya and directed them to conduct their human sacrifices. For Landa, K'awiil was simply another trick the devil used to control and manipulate the Maya. He failed to recognize that he used Catholicism in the same way he claimed the devil used the native religions.
Now eventually, Diego de Landa's persecution of the Maya got so bad, got so out of hand, that another Franciscan bishop, Francisco de Toral, had to intervene.
Although Toral was a supporter of the Spanish Empire, he believed the conversion of the natives did not need to be so violent. After all, it was Toral who commissioned Bernardino de Sahagún to write about the Mexica that we saw in a previous episode. Anyways,
Toral listened to the complaints by the Maya and took their side. He complained about Landa's, quote, excessive desire for power and authority, unquote. Toral freed hundreds of Maya that were being detained by Landa and his supporters. They claimed that Landa had overstepped his authority. Eventually, Landa has to defend himself in Spain, where his legal struggles continue, and this is why and where he wrote the account to justify his actions before the court. Eventually, Landa wins his trial and travels back to the Yucatan in 1572, where he was appointed as a bishop. And this would be a pattern that the Spanish repeat over and over again to follow a military victory with a cultural, religious, and spiritual victory.